At 70, I thought my worst nights were behind me. 3 hours from home, I was having dinner with my old police partners when my phone flashed with a doorbell alert. I opened the live feed expecting a stray deer. Instead, my daughter was pounding on my front door in the pouring rain. Dad opened the door. My son-in-law seized her by the arm and hauled her toward a car at the curb. Then, a second figure moved into frame and spoke words I have never been able to shake. I glanced at my former partners and said, "Gentlemen, are you ready for one last hunt? Thank you for being here. It means a great deal to me. Welcome to His Hidden Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here. Before we go any further, if you want the next story to reach you, tap subscribe now and let the channel find you when it matters. And while you're settling in, I'd love to know, is this your first time here, or have you been along for a while? Drop it in the comments, it helps me understand who's listening. One more thing before we begin. Some details in this story have been shaped for audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but what I have to say is worth your time. The rye whiskey had been sitting in front of me for the better part of 20 minutes. The ice was losing its shape, dissolving slowly into the amber, and my hand hadn't gone near it once. I wouldn't have been able to tell you why. Something in me was holding out, waiting for what I had no idea. Harlan. Clifford's voice arrived across the table like a thrown gauntlet. You gonna drink that thing, or are you just hoping it learns to talk? I lifted my eyes. Clifford Rafferty had been polishing that look since 1986, one part suspicion, one part dry amusement, with a thin current of irritation underneath that told you he was clocked in and paying close attention. I'm enjoying the build-up, I told him. Strange man, Devereaux, always have been. 11 years at this table, and that hasn't changed once. He leveled his fork at me like a pointer. Says something about my own judgment I'd rather not examine too closely. The name is Harlan Devereaux. 70 years old, 5 years out of the job, living on Augusta Road in Greenville, Georgia, the kind of block where oaks arch over the sidewalks, and the sharpest question on any given Thursday is whether the hardware store locks up at 6 or 7. 33 years as a lead homicide detective. I understood perfectly well why a man shouldn't get too trusting of stillness, and I'd gone ahead and gotten comfortable with it, regardless. Most mornings I woke up glad for that. The Riverside Grill hugs the Tennessee riverfront right there in Knoxville, windows running floor to ceiling, amber light pooling across the tables. The whole room warm enough to make a midweek dinner feel like something worth dressing up for, and a kitchen that handles smoked trout in ways that no menu description has ever done justice to. 11 Octobers in a row, we'd made the trip. 5 of us, one long table pulled close to the glass. Conversations picked back up exactly where they'd been abandoned 12 months prior. Audrey Witten was at the far end of the table, cutting her pecan pie into careful, even slices. She brought one every year. Nobody had to ask, nobody issued an invitation. It was simply what Audrey did. 64 years old, 3 years removed from her last day of work, and she spent her afternoons volunteering at the church hall, on her street running, free math lessons for kids who needed them. No charge, no conditions. There was something about her I never did find the right label for, a particular blend of steadiness and warmth that settled a room the moment she walked into it. "Beaumont, hold the plate level," she said, her voice unhurried but final. Beaumont Halsey seized the plate in both hands and lifted it like a man presenting an offering at an altar. "I am holding it level. The pie is the problem here." "The pie," Audrey replied, her knife moving in clean. "Even strokes is not the problem. Then what keeps Beaumont?" "Yes. Eat the pie." The laugh that came out of him filled the whole table. Loose, enormous, the laugh of a man who'd long since stopped fighting the things most people exhaust themselves arguing against. Beaumont was fully retired, most content alone on a boat before sunrise, and by any fair accounting, he was the most at ease among us. There was a time I resented that. These days, I was just glad to see it. Aldous Crenshaw sat to my left, his white dress shirt somehow still immaculate. At 9 in the evening, his phone turned face down next to his fork. Aldous was the only one still drawing a paycheck, director of the State Bureau of Investigation, and the cumulative burden of several counties had made a permanent residence behind his eyes. He bore it the way principled men carry difficult things, no complaints, no setting it down to rest. You pick up anything on the Harrove case. His voice barely cleared the distance between us. Aldous, I've been retired. That wasn't really an answer. It was precisely an answer. A faint smile surfaced. Fair point. I let myself look at them for a moment. Really look the habit I'd developed in the years since turning in my badge. Not running profiles, not reading tells. Just sitting among people who'd spent 3 decades inside the same work I had and still turned up to share a meal. Then Nora drifted into my thoughts. Nothing I could point to had put her there. She wasn't in any danger. That was what I told myself by that window that evening. She was back in Greenville an hour and a half away, working her way through the slow disintegration of a marriage that had been unraveling for 2 years. A father picks these things up, the way he picks up changes in weather, the slight hollow tone that had crept into her voice, the way she'd start to say something and then ease the words towards safer ground. She was 39 and she'd absorbed my particular tendency to offer the half-truth when the whole one was too much weight to carry openly. I reached into my jacket and drew out my wallet. Behind the license, behind a pair of receipts I'd been meaning to pitch for months, there was a photograph. Nora and I on the front porch at Augusta Road the previous fall. Leaves scattered across the yard, the sky deepening to orange at our backs. She was laughing genuinely fully, the kind that has no idea a lens is pointed at it. I'd been keeping it on me for over a year. I pulled it out whenever distance put miles between me and home. Why exactly, I could never quite say, only that not doing it didn't feel like an option. Every single year, Clifford said his voice, low eyes on me. Every single year, I said back and tucked it away. My phone pulsed inside my jacket pocket. Once, then again, a third time. Rapid, deliberate. I fished it out and found the red badge on the doorbell camera, app the compact unit I'd fixed above my front door on Augusta Road 4 years back. Motion detected. Live footage available. A smile came without my asking for it. Last week, a red fox had wandered straight up to my front step and stood there for a full 40 seconds, looking directly into the lens like it was waiting for an interview. I had sent the clip to Beaumont, and he had forwarded it to 11 people within the hour. Your fox circling back for another look? Clifford asked, eyes still on his food. Probably. I tapped into the app. The footage spun up slowly, or something with ambitions above its station. Then the image resolved. My chest went rigid. A woman stood at my front door in the rain, driving the flat of her hand against the wood. Hard, desperate, rhythmic. Hair plastered to her brow. Mouth stretched open. Face turned up to find the camera. The expression on it was the kind that travels clean through a screen and takes hold of something inside you. I knew that face. 39 years of knowing it. Harlan. Audrey's voice snapped from the far end of the table, sharp, immediate. She'd had her eyes on me, and she'd caught the change as it moved across my face. Harlan, talked to me. What is it? What's happened? My grip on the phone went white-knuckled. My throat shut down. Something loud and unsteady was working itself out behind my ribs. This was not a fox. It was never going to be a fox. 8 minutes after that notification reached me, I was still rooted to the spot, my palm flat against the tablecloth, something moving in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. I want to lay out precisely what I saw on that screen, because the people who put that night into motion, they built their plan around geography. They were counting on a man of 70 sitting stranded in a restaurant, 3 hours off, watching helplessly and unable to act. They had accounted for every factor they could envision. They had not accounted for me. The camera above my door is not a consumer product off a hardware store shelf. I'd obtained it through someone I knew from my last year on the force commercial grade, engineered for perimeter surveillance, not delivery alerts. It runs off a dedicated power line, so it never goes dark. And it carries a directional microphone built with noise cancellation designed specifically to pull a human voice cleanly out of outdoor conditions. In light rain at close quarters, it captures everything. That night, it captured everything. The recording runs 63 seconds. I know because I have returned to it more times than I'll ever say aloud, and I have counted everyone. It opens with Nora. She's at my door coat, hanging open, no time to fasten the buttons, hair already pressed flat by the rain. The knock she's throwing at that door is not the measured tap of an expected visitor. It is the hard, rhythmic, urgent pounding of someone for whom that door needs to open right now. Her fist meets the wood again and again, and her mouth is wide open, calling my name. The camera's audio carries a 2-second buffer before it fully engages. For those 2 seconds, I have no sound at all. I have only her face. I have known that face for 39 years. I know every form it takes. the focused crease between her brows when something on the page resists her, the laugh she can't rein in no matter how hard she tries, the composed face she constructs for rooms full of people she doesn't know. I had watched that face go frightened twice in her entire life before that night. Both times, I'd been standing right beside her. I was not beside her now. Then Fletcher moved into the edge of the frame. Fletcher Calloway, my son-in-law, the man I'd watched take my daughter's hand 6 years back at an outdoor ceremony in late September. The man whose handshake I'd returned 100 times emerged from the dark at the side of the shot and seized Nora by the arm, not gently. The kind of grip that doesn't negotiate, Nora cried out. I could read the cry on her face an instant before the audio arrived, and she wheeled toward him and fought with everything she had. Her free hand found the door frame and locked onto it. Knuckles blanched against the painted wood, her whole body straining in the opposite direction. She was not going to release that hold easily. That was my daughter. Fletcher wrenched harder and she lost the frame. She stumbled off the steps sideways. Then a third figure entered the shot. Cordelia Calloway, Fletcher's mother, the woman who had presided over every Calloway family occasion I'd attended across 6 years, with the quiet authority of someone who has never once doubted her right to be in charge, stepped onto my front porch without a trace of hurry. Her coat was long and expensive. Her right hand held a phone, and she wasn't using it to reach anyone. She was recording. Standing on my property in the rain, capturing my daughter being dragged off, wearing an expression so completely undisturbed that it turned my stomach to look at it. Cordelia moved close to Nora, close enough that the microphone gathered every word without straining. She looked directly at my daughter and delivered it quietly, deliberately the way a person speaks a verdict they composed well in advance. Call for your father, see if the old man can reach you from 3 hours away. Then she turned and looked squarely into the lens of my camera, directly into it. For exactly 2 seconds she held that gaze, not threatening, not caught, just certain. The look of someone who has already settled in her mind how this ends. Fletcher steered Nora toward the car at the curb. She caught the door handle pulled, and it said something. The rain swallowed, the door shut. Headlights swept across the front yard. The car moved out and disappeared. 4 seconds later, the frame was empty and the screen went black. My hand was trembling when I lowered the phone from my face. Not the loose theatrical shaking of panic I'd stood in too many bad rooms across too many years for that, but trembling the way hands do when the body takes in something the mind hasn't fully processed yet. I set the phone face up on the table, pressed both palms flat against the cloth, and made myself breathe. Audrey noticed my hands before anyone else. She was out of her chair while the others were still reading the change in my face, and she covered my hands with both of hers, leaned in, and spoke with a steadiness that I could tell she was working to maintain. Harlan, tell me what I'm looking at. I turned the phone toward the middle of the table and slid it forward. Clifford took it first. He watched 15 seconds, and every muscle along his jaw pulled tight. He passed it to Aldous without a word. Aldous watched the full 63 seconds, his expression giving away nothing, then said something quietly to Beaumont. Beaumont watched it immediately, then pressed his lips together until the color left them and tilted his eyes to the ceiling for a beat, as though he was arriving at a decision. Audrey took it last. She watched Cordelia's face fill the screen. She watched that 2-second stare directly into the lens. When the footage ended, she set the phone down with care, and when she looked at me, her eyes were bright and red at the corners, and her voice was rock steady when she said, "She's your daughter, Harlan." "Go get her!" I picked up my phone. "I've got a situation at my house," I said, holding each of their eyes in turn. "Anyone willing to drive tonight?" Not one of them hesitated. Aldous pushed his chair back from the table. His glass met the wood with a sharp crack. He was already straightening his jacket as the words came out. That he said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority, is exactly all I needed to hear. 14 minutes. That number settled into my chest like something solid as I pushed through the front door of the Riverside Grill and stepped out into the cold. 14 minutes since the notification had reached me. 14 minutes since Fletcher had put my daughter in that car and driven away from my front door in the rain. Every moment I stood still was another mile I'd have to recover. The parking lot sat flush against the riverfront. The Tennessee air off the water hit sharp and cold, and my breath came out white ahead of me. Behind me, the door swung open, and then all 4 of them were standing in the cold, no invitation necessary. Aldous had his phone out before the door finished closing. Clifford had his keys already in hand. Beaumont was drawing his jacket closed and reading the lot. Audrey came out last. There are people in your life you never have to walk through a crisis with, step by step. You let them see what you're facing, and they simply act. Every one of those four had spent 30-plus years building precisely that capacity. Here's what I know, I said, keeping my voice level and flat the way 33 years of training holds when you can't afford anything else. My daughter was at my house on Augusta Road tonight. She was taken from the front door by her husband, Fletcher Calloway. His mother, Cordelia Calloway, was there and orchestrating it. What I saw in that footage was not a decision made in the moment. This was planned and coordinated. I let that sit for a second. They're heading to the Calloway estate in Chanticleer. Aldis's thumb was already tracking across his screen. How long since they cleared your property? 15 minutes at this point. I'm calling Greenville County Sheriff's Office. I have a contact there, Deputy Broderick Haynes. He's worked with my office before. I can put his unit in position within 12 minutes. He was already half turned away. Phone rising to his ear. Nobody moves on or off that property without me knowing. Clifford started toward the vehicles without a word. Jaw-set posture settling into the particular controlled stillness he always carried when circumstances turned serious. Beaumont laid a hand briefly on Clifford's shoulder as they walked, a small thing, the kind of gesture men who've worked dangerous situations together for decades pass between themselves without thinking. Audrey stepped directly into my path before I could take a step. She isn't a tall woman, but she has a way of claiming exactly the space the moment calls for. She took hold of both my forearms and held on, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were bright and glassy at the edges, her chin doing something she was clearly fighting back. She had been solid through all of it, inside, through the footage, through the whole table going quiet around it. Out here in the cold, with just the two of us for a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. "Harlan Devereaux," she said, and her voice broke slightly at the start before it steadied. "You are going to walk into that house, and you are going to bring that girl home. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?" "Yes," I said. "I hear you." Her grip tightened on my arms for one moment, fierce and certain, and then she released me and stepped back and pulled herself straight. And with that, Audrey Whitten was composed again. One nod. "Then go," she said. I turned back to Aldis. He'd lowered his phone and was watching me with that particular focused attention that had made him the sharpest person in every room he'd ever occupied. "Aldis," I said, "before any more calls, there's something you need to hear first." He waited. 3 weeks ago, Nora called me. The way she sounded on that call. I've spent 33 years listening to people who are afraid and working to hide it. She had that quality in her voice. Nothing explicit came out. She redirected things somewhere less exposed before any of it crystallized. I held his gaze, but I heard what she wasn't saying. "What did you do?" he asked. The morning after that call, I got in touch with a supplier I'd used through the department and had a button camera sent overnight to her place. It passes for a standard coat button, exactly. Same diameter, same color, same material. You cannot distinguish it by sight or by touch. It records continuously to encrypted cloud storage. I kept my voice even. I mailed it to her along with written instructions, then called her the day it arrived and talked her through the whole thing. She knew precisely what it was, precisely what it did, and attaching it to her coat was her own decision. Full awareness, full consent, nothing hidden on her side. Aldis closed his eyes for a moment. When they opened, something behind them had changed. The look of a man who has just discovered a card he hadn't known was in play. "If she had that coat on tonight," he said slowly, "she did. I could see it clearly in the footage. Then we have interior video of everything that took place inside that house. We have interior video." I confirmed it. "There's something else on her phone as well, but that becomes relevant later. Right now, your people need to be moving." He placed his hand on my shoulder for exactly 1 second, brief, firm. Then he stepped away, and his phone was at his ear, his voice carrying the full authority that came with his position. Aldis Crenshaw was director of the State Bureau of Investigation. When he placed a call in that capacity, people didn't stop to ask questions. They moved. I headed toward Clifford's truck. My phone rang. I pulled it out. Unknown number, no area code displayed. I recognized the type of call you dismiss on any ordinary evening. My thumb drifted toward the button to decline it. Then the name resolved on the screen. My phone had matched the incoming number to my contacts list. Stellan Calloway Fletcher's older brother, the quiet one, the man who had sat across from me at 3 separate family dinners over 6 years and looked me squarely in the eye every single time, without any angle behind it. I had always noticed that about him. I had always noted it and filed it away. I stood between two parked cars in the cold Knoxville air and stared at his name on the screen. I nearly let it go. I answered on the fourth ring, Mr. Devereaux. The voice that came through was more measured than I'd expected. Not soft, but deliberate, the voice of someone who had weighed every word before making the call. This is Stellan Calloway Fletcher's brother. I know you have no reason to take anything I say on faith right now. I need you to hear me out regardless. In 6 years of knowing the Calloway family, Stellan had always been the exception. Fletcher had his mother's comfort with authority, her tendency to regard people as instruments to be picked up and used at the right moment. Cordelia operated on calculation, the way the rest of us operate on instinct. But Stellan was different in a way I'd registered and never quite put words to. He was the only person in that family who had ever looked me across a dinner table without wanting something back. I'd stored that observation away somewhere without ever consciously deciding to. Standing in that cold parking lot, I understood why I'd kept it. "I'm listening," I said. "Talk." I heard him draw in a long breath, the kind you take when something is about to be spoken aloud for the first time. Last Sunday evening, I was at my mother's house. I'd come to drop off some estate paperwork, nothing connected to any of this. I hadn't intended to stay. He paused and his voice fell lower. I heard them in the study, my mother and Fletcher. The door wasn't pulled fully shut and I heard the plan. All of it. Aldous had moved to my left without my noticing. I didn't look at him. What plan exactly? I said, "the documents." Stellan's voice broke slightly on those two words, not performed, but the way a voice breaks when it's bearing real weight, forcing Nora to sign away her rights. The timing, the location, the specific detail. He stopped, then tried again. That specific detail about ensuring you were far enough away that reaching her in time would be impossible. A short exhale. They discussed it the way you'd talk through logistics for a business meeting. Aldous' jaw went hard beside me. I felt it without looking. "Stellan," I said, holding my voice steady. "You heard all of this a week ago. Why are you only calling tonight?" The pause that followed was not long, but it was the kind that carries a person's full reckoning with themselves. When he spoke again, his voice had been stripped down to something honest and unguarded. Because I told myself she wouldn't go through with it. I told myself Fletcher would pull back at the last moment, that my mother was posturing, that this was the kind of threat that dissolves once it meets reality. He breathed. I was wrong about every bit of it. I knew I was wrong about every bit of it. And I kept telling myself the other story, because it was easier than making the call I should have made 7 days ago. His voice broke fully then. He didn't try to smooth it over. "I am not calling you looking to be forgiven for that. I am calling because Nora is my sister-in-law, and she has never done a single thing to deserve what my family is putting her through tonight. And I cannot sit in my apartment and act as though I don't know where she is." I turned slightly away so I could speak without raising my voice over the wind coming off the river. "Give me the address," I said. He gave it without a moment's hesitation. The property name and full street address, a specific estate in Chanticleer on the south side of Greenville. The kind of address where old money sits behind stone walls and iron gates and has never needed to explain itself to anyone. He read it clearly, then added, "The entrance gate runs on a 6-digit code," and he read off 6 numbers, slow and precise. Aldous already had his phone up. He was typing before Stellan reached the 3rd digit. "Is there exterior security beyond the gate?" I asked, one camera above the front door angled at the entry steps, nothing else covering the perimeter. My mother always believed the neighborhood itself was sufficient deterrent. A short, hollow sound that stopped well short of a laugh. She built that house to contain things not to worry about, what came from outside. Aldous tapped my arm once finished already transmitting. I gave him a short nod. "Stellan." My voice stayed flat. "Do not reach out to anyone in your family. No messages to Fletcher or your mother or anyone in their circle. Stay exactly where you are right now. I'll be in contact when we know more. Can you hold to that?" "Yes." His voice had gone quiet again, pared back to something plain. "Mr. Devereaux, I almost didn't make this call. I want you to understand that because you need to know what you're walking into. My family is very skilled at making what they've done appear to be something else entirely. I have 63 seconds of footage that isn't interested in appearances." I said, "Stay by your phone." I ended the call. 20 minutes had elapsed since the notification landed. At the pace Fletcher would be driving, Nora had put close to 20 miles between herself and Augusta Road. She was already well into Greenville County, possibly already through the gate at Chanticleer. Every second I remained in this parking lot was a second I wasn't closing that gap. Aldous looked at me and said quietly, "Haynes has the address and the gate code. His team is already moving." He paused. "That brother did the right thing. Late, but he did it. Late and right still counts," I said. Across the lot, Clifford's window came down. The engine was already running. Harlan. His voice was flat and direct and left no space for debate. "We need to move right now." I was already in motion. Clifford had the truck rolling before I got the door fully shut. I had made the run between Knoxville and Greenville more times than I could reliably count across 33 years. Every mile of it was familiar in different configurations. I-24, west then, north on I-75, then east on I-26 through the Mountain Gap, and down into Greenville County. Funerals, depositions, a law enforcement conference in 2002 that I had driven home from through a thunderstorm so violent I could barely make out the hood of my own car. One fishing weekend with Clifford when we were both younger, considerably less weathered, and the fish had been considerably more willing. I had covered that road in every condition the Southeast knows how to produce. I had never covered it like this. Clifford had the speedometer at 85 before we cleared Knoxville's city limits. Nobody said a word about it. Beaumont was in the back seat, his frame occupying the space with the particular stillness of a man who had long since learned that motion without purpose solves nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, and not a word had left his mouth since we'd walked out of that parking lot. None were required. 3 decades alongside Beaumont Halsey had made one thing plain: the man's silence in a crisis was its own kind of statement. I dialed Alton Pritchard. Alton had been handling my legal affairs for 22 years. 67 years old, silver-haired, and carrying a quality I rated above nearly anything else I looked for in a professional. When a call came in at 9:15 on a Friday night, flagged as urgent, he picked up clean. No performance, no reluctance, just his voice at the other end already engaged. "Tell me what you need. Alton, my daughter, is being held against her will at a private estate in Chanticleer, Greenville. I've got camera footage of the coercion that took place at my Augusta Road property roughly 25 minutes ago. What I need is an emergency search warrant petition drafted tonight and sitting ready to submit the instant Greenville County Courthouse unlocks its doors tomorrow morning." A pen scratched somewhere on his end. "Address," I read it off. "Law enforcement on point, Aldous Crenshaw, SBI director. His people are already rolling toward the property." Short, efficient pause. Complete draft in hand before midnight. Aldis's office layers and their documentation were at the clerk's window at 8:00 a.m. sharp. His voice never wavered, but I could detect something underneath it, the particular weight of a man who knew me well enough to ask. "Harlan, is she physically safe where she is right now?" "She is inside that house," I told him. "Every move I'm making is aimed at putting her somewhere safer than that." "Then keep moving," Alton said. "The filings are on me. You go handle what only you can handle." I cut the call and rested the phone against my leg. Aldous rang 6 minutes into the drive, his voice stripped to the compact, fast cadence of someone running parallel tracks at once. "The GPS tracking is active," he said. "Fletcher's vehicle carries a factory-installed telematics system. Under exigent circumstances, documented risk of immediate harm to a person. I applied for an emergency judicial order through a Georgia District Court duty judge on standby tonight. Authorized by phone 9 minutes ago." The manufacturer released real-time location data under that order. A pause. "Harlan, the dot has stopped moving. Stopped 4 minutes ago." Every muscle across my shoulders locked up. "Chanticleer," I said. "Same property. The address Stellan gave us. She is there." Aldous kept his voice controlled, though the effort was audible underneath it. "Fletcher's vehicle hasn't moved from that spot. She's inside." I looked over at Clifford. He'd taken in everything he needed. One hard clench of the jaw, deliberate as a fist, and then his face went flat and he held the lane. "Haynes," I asked Aldous. 11 minutes out from right now. His unit started rolling the moment I transmitted that address. Brief pause. "I want to give you something on Haynes because when he moves tonight, you need to be behind him completely. 2 combat tours before he came on at Greenville County Sheriff's Office 3 years back. I've had him on 2 SBI coordinated operations. The kind of measured judgment you either arrive with or you never have. There's no classroom for it. He won't take a single step past the line until the legal authorization is in his hand, and once it is, he'll move without hesitation. Tonight requires both of those things, in exactly that order. I trust the way you read your people, I said. How far are you behind us? I checked the signs blurring past in the dark. 2 hours out shorter if the mountain section doesn't close on us. Let Haynes and me hold the next 2 hours, Aldous said. That's our job tonight. I set the phone on my knee. Clifford gave me one sideways look. The camera on her coat. The device on her phone. You'd actually had all that running. 2 weeks on the coat, I said. 8 months on the phone. Every detail, her knowledge, her choice, her consent. I turned my eyes back to the dark highway. She trusted the plan. Clifford was quiet for a beat. So you saw this coming. I built for everything, I said. What I never built for was needing it. From the back seat, Beaumont shifted forward. When he spoke, it was in the low, unhurried register he reserved for the moments he meant completely. How long until we're in Greenville? Clifford replied without glancing up. 20 minutes if I open it up. Beaumont eased back. Then, open it up. Clifford's right foot pressed another half-inch toward the floor, and the road unspooled ahead of us, the dark outline of the Tennessee-Georgia ridgeline, hanging out beyond the headlights somewhere, and behind stone walls in Chanticleer, a red dot on Aldous' screen sat motionless and silent. Haynes was 12 minutes from that door. I was 2 hours short. The arithmetic offered nothing reassuring, and the only available response was to keep driving. While my headlights were still cutting through Tennessee 40 miles from the state line, Clifford sitting at 88 with the cruise control disengaged. The portion of this story I had no view of was already underway. Let me be straightforward about something before I go on. I did not see any of what I am about to describe. I was the passenger in a truck on I-24 with a 2-hour gap between me and that house. The account of what happened inside the Callaway estate during those hours came to me through two people. The first was Alton the next morning in his office, where he opened his laptop and ran me through 41 minutes of button camera footage and said nothing while it played. The second was Celestina Fuentes, who showed up at my kitchen on Augusta Road 3 days after everything ended, lowered herself into the chair across from mine, with both hands tight around a coffee cup, and laid out every detail of what she'd observed, measured and thorough, the way someone speaks when they've been holding something at weight for too long, and have finally found the moment to put it down. I'll give it to you the way it came to me. Celestina Fuentes had been the domestic manager for the Callaway household for 4 years. Before that, 16 years circulating among families in the Greenville area, and before that, a stretch of close to a decade living right there on Augusta Road. That was the basis of my knowing her not intimately, not as a close friend, but the way two people recognize each other in a community after enough shared years. She was methodical and perceptive, the kind of professional who spends a career moving through the edges of other people's lives without drawing attention to herself. My number lived in her phone because she'd reached out about a neighborhood matter some years back before I'd retired, and she'd simply never cleared it out. She'd had no occasion to use it again until that night. Fletcher brought Nora through the front door at 8:40 p.m. Celestina was in the kitchen when the door sounded, and she moved through to the entry hall the way her work had trained her to, quietly, efficiently, and then stopped when she took in Nora's face. Sitting at my kitchen table 3 days later, this is what Celestina told me. Mrs. Nora was not crying. She was not raising her voice. What she was doing was harder than either. She was keeping herself intact on sheer force, and you could see in every line of her what that was costing. Cordelia was already in the living room, settled at the mahogany table beside the fireplace. The fire was going. The lighting was warm and measured the whole room, carrying the arranged, deliberate quality of a setting someone had prepared ahead of time. Laid out before Cordelia was a document stack, nearly 2 inches thick edges, perfectly aligned, a single pen resting on top. When Fletcher walked Nora in, Cordelia looked up and offered the precise smile of a woman who has already written the ending of the evening in her head. Nora, she said, the tone of someone welcoming a guest whose arrival was never in question. Please sit down. There's no reason this has to be unpleasant. Nora's eyes went to the documents, then to the pen. She sat down. Celestina carried a tea tray into the room, 2 cups the good china, the set Cordelia brought out specifically for matters she considered significant. She positioned the tray on the side table with the care her job demanded, and in doing so, she got a clear look at what was on top of that document stack. She didn't need to study it long. The language on the first page was plain enough from where she stood. She looked across at Fletcher, back against the far wall, arms folded, jaw fixed in the set expression she had come to recognize as the outer edge of his temper. Then her eyes moved back to Nora. Celestina told me, 30 seconds in that room, and I understood everything. She did not let it show on her face. She did not make a sound. She finished setting out the cups and straightened the tray with the unhurried precision she always brought to small tasks. Then she walked back out into the hallway and drew the door nearly shut behind her. Standing in that dim corridor, her hands were trembling so badly she fumbled her phone on the first attempt and heard it clatter to the floor. She crouched and retrieved it. She opened her contacts. She found my name, Harlan Devereaux, in a section of her phone she hadn't touched in years. She typed 2 words and hit send before she could talk herself out of it. She's here. Back in the living room, Cordelia was walking Nora through the documents with the smooth, rehearsed cadence of someone who had run this particular speech more than once. Each page covered a separate piece of the marital estate property. Wright's financial accounts, the unraveling of Nora's position in several investments Fletcher had built during the marriage. The language was dense and the explanations were deliberately pared down the way you simplify things when you want the other party to feel the decision is being made in their favor. What Nora noticed and what the button camera captured was a single sheet of paper sitting roughly 2/3 of the way into the stack that didn't belong with the rest. It was printed on different stock, slightly heavier, slightly brighter. The typeface matched the margins lined up, and unless you were moving through every page with genuine attention, rather than trying to absorb the whole pile at once, you would never catch it. Cordelia slipped it in without glancing at Fletcher, without a word, without any explanation. It was as Alton described it to me the next morning in his office, with the camera footage frozen on the wall behind him, a profit-sharing agreement, a document quietly redirecting a specific percentage of assets through a channel that had nothing to do with the divorce settlement and everything to do with Cordelia's private financial arrangements. A document she had written for herself, tucked into that stack, with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had never once been caught doing anything wrong. She was too certain of what was coming to understand what she had just handed us. "Sign it," Cordelia said, setting the pen on the table directly in front of Nora. Her voice was still smooth, still even, but what lived beneath the instruction was not a request. "All of it tonight, and we can all move forward like reasonable people." Nora looked at the pen. Then my phone lit up on the center console of Clifford's truck. A text notification, unknown number, except my phone knew it from my contacts. 2 words on the screen. I read them. Then I turned the phone and held it toward Aldous Crenshaw's voice coming through the speaker. He read them and went quiet for exactly 1 second. "Forward it to me," he said without raising his voice. I did, 25 minutes out. I had been watching the clock on Clifford's dashboard the way I used to track evidence timelines, not with obsession, but with the steady, deliberate attention of a man who knows that time is the one variable he cannot bend. 25 minutes out through the windshield, the highway was climbing, and the ridgelines were pressing in on both sides. The first faint bloom of Greenville's ambient glow was beginning to seep into the eastern sky above the peaks. Aldous called at exactly 25 minutes out. I want to tell you what it sounds like when Aldous Crenshaw is running at full capacity. Because if you haven't heard it, you've missed something genuinely worth witnessing. Some people get louder under pressure. Others get sharper. Aldous had always been so far into the second category that the question wasn't really worth asking. Listening to him through the center console speaker under the engine noise of Clifford's truck doing 82 on a mountain grade was like listening to a precision instrument doing the exact work it was made for. "A Haynes has 4 units in position," Aldous said, 2 covering the main estate entrance off the forest road, 2 holding the full rear boundary. There's a creek on the east side and private land buffer to the north. The property has no exit that isn't being watched. He paused for exactly 1 beat. He is holding, waiting for the word. "The gate code," I said. "Did Haynes confirm it? He needs you to read it directly, not from memory, from whatever you wrote it down on." I pulled out my phone and found the note I'd typed while Stellan was talking, 6 digits written out in order. I read them one at a time, slowly with a deliberate beat between each. "That matches," Aldous said. Haynes confirmed the entry protocol. Then, without shifting his tone, "Harlan Alton called 5 minutes ago. The warrant is signed." A Greenville County duty judge reviewed the full probable cause documentation, the camera footage, the GPS data, the text message from Celestina, the voluntary witness statement from Stellan, and authorized the emergency search warrant at 10:17 tonight. Alton is standing at the end of the Chanticleer access road right now with the original in hand. A brief pause. Everything we do from this point forward is fully authorized. We have no legal exposure, not a single thread. Something in my chest released a fraction of an inch. 20 minutes, I said. I need 20 more minutes, Aldous. I know. His voice shifted slightly, the operational edge softening into something quieter underneath it. Haynes is the right person for tonight. I have watched him work in conditions that would have finished other officers. He is not going to let anything change inside that house before you get there. Trust what we built tonight, Harlan. Trust it. I pressed my back harder into the seat and looked out at the dark ridgelines moving past. The glow ahead was stronger now. Greenville was close enough to feel the way you feel a city before you can fully see it. Keep talking to me, I said. Just stay on the line. I'm not going anywhere, Aldous said. From the back seat, Beaumont leaned forward until his forearms rested on the gap between the front headrests. He had been quiet for most of the drive, the quiet of a man who respects the weight of a situation enough not to fill it with noise. Now he spoke. Harlan. His voice was in that low, unhurried register he reserved for things he meant without qualification. That daughter of yours has your backbone and your brain. She is in that room right now, making every right call she can make. I have known you for 30 years, and I am telling you she is holding. My throat tightened, my hand pressed flat against my thigh, hard enough to feel the pressure through the fabric. Don't, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. Not yet. Say it to me again when I can see her face. Beaumont held my gaze for a moment. Then he reached forward and gripped my shoulder, once brief firm, the kind of grip that doesn't ask permission and doesn't wait for a response, and settled back. Clifford spoke without pulling his eyes from the road. 20 minutes. The gap is clear. I can bring it down to 15. Do it, I said. The truck pushed harder into the climb, and the Greenville glow spread wider against the peaks. Through the speaker, I heard Haynes's voice come through for the first time, speaking to Aldous. Not to me, but loud enough that the speaker caught every word. He was younger than I'd pictured, steady in that specific earned way of someone who has moved through genuinely dangerous situations and learned to stay clean in all of them. Unit positions holding, Haynes said. No movement from the vehicle inside the gate. Lights on in the front room and what looks like the west-facing study. We are waiting for your signal director. Aldous answered him in the shorthand of two people who have worked together long enough to strip out everything unnecessary, then came back to me. Everything is in position, he said. Everything except me, I said. Yes, he said. But you are 15 minutes out and closing. That is not the same as not being there. I kept my eyes on the ridgeline, and I thought about the photograph in my wallet, the real laugh, the one that had no idea it was being captured. I held that in the front of my mind, and I let Clifford drive, and I did not look at the clock again. Inside that house, Cordelia Calloway was executing a plan she had spent weeks refining. She had accounted for distance. She had accounted for time. She had accounted for the reaction of a man she had dismissed as too old and too far away to be any concern at all tonight. She had not accounted for a single button on her daughter-in-law's coat. She had no idea that what she was carrying out inside that beautiful firelit room was the last plan she would ever see through, entirely on her own terms. The footage from Nora's button camera runs 41 minutes and 17 seconds. I watched every second of it the following morning in Alton's office on the 3rd floor of his building on Wardlaw Street. Door-closed blinds tilted against the early light, a cup of coffee sitting cold on the desk beside me that I never once brought to my lips. Alton got the laptop running hit play and slipped quietly out of the room without asking whether I wanted company. He had known me for 22 years. He already knew the answer. I watched it twice. The first thing that strikes you about that footage is how composed Nora is. Not the composure of a person who has given up. Something different from that. Something that carries a higher cost and a higher value, the kind that is only available to someone who has already made their decision before they walk through the door. I want to tell you what I saw. The button camera sat at coat lapel height, angled slightly upward. The living room of the Western estate filled the frame fireplace along the right edge. The mahogany table centered Cordelia's face directly across. The image was sharper than I expected for a device that small. Every expression caught clearly in the firelight. Cordelia set the document stack in front of Nora and said pleasantly, "Take all the time you need with these. It's really quite self-explanatory." Nora drew the stack toward her and began to read, not skimming reading. Her finger tracked each line, slowing where the language thickened, doubling back on two separate pages to recover ground she had already covered. Across the table, Cordelia's composure began to develop a hairline fracture along its edges. She topped off her own glass. She repositioned a coaster twice. She looked over at Fletcher, who found something interesting on the floor. 3 minutes and 40 seconds in, Cordelia said, "It's not complicated, Nora. The language is boilerplate. You don't need to work through every single clause." Nora didn't look up. "I'm being thorough," she said. Her voice was level, completely, almost unsettlingly level. "I'd imagine you'd want me to understand what I'm putting my name on." Cordelia's smile held, but something behind her eyes quietly recalibrated. Watching it the next morning, I stopped the footage there and sat with that exchange for a moment. 2 weeks before that night, Nora had come to Augusta Road for dinner, and we had stayed at my kitchen table until well past midnight. I had told her as plainly as I could, "If this happens, your job is not to fight the room. Your job is to be in the room on your feet and to trust the plan." She had looked at me from across that table, the way she used to look at me when she was 12, facing something that frightened her, but that she was going to walk toward regardless. And she had said, "Okay, Dad, I trust it." Watching that footage, watching her move through every page of those documents with the methodical patience of someone who already knows what they are going to do, I had to put my hand over my mouth and hold it there for a moment before I could go on. 7 minutes in, she reached the page Cordelia had slipped into the stack. I watched Nora's face in the footage the way you watch for a flicker, a pause, a tightening around the eyes, any small tell that she had registered something. The camera couldn't capture what her eyes were reading, but it captured everything her face did while she read it, and her face for exactly 3 seconds on that page went very still, in a way it hadn't gone still on any other page. Alton paused the footage there and pointed to it without a word. Her expression didn't shift by a single degree, but that stillness was the tell. She turned to the next page and kept reading. Cordelia, sitting across from her, had no idea. Nora finished the final page, set the stack back on the table, and reached for the pen. She signed each document in order. Her signature was clear and deliberate, the same signature she had always had, the one that looked as though she had thought carefully about how she wanted her name to exist in the world, and then committed to it without reservation. Page by page, working through the stack. The button camera caught every movement of the pen, every document title visible in the firelight, every word Cordelia spoke during the signing, including several that Alton later flagged in his notes with 2 underlines. When the last page was signed, Nora laid the pen parallel to the stack and looked across the table at Cordelia. She didn't look away, she didn't smile, she raised her chin the smallest fraction of an inch, a movement so subtle that Cordelia clearly didn't read it for what it was, and held Cordelia's gaze with the steady, patient quality of someone who knows something the other person does not, and has decided to let them go on, not knowing it for precisely as long as necessary. Cordelia lifted her glass and tilted it slightly toward Nora in a small, private gesture of triumph. The firelight caught the glass and the satisfied pull of her expression, and the button camera recorded all of it in perfect detail. Watching that smile on my laptop screen the next morning, alone in Alton's office, I felt something move through my chest that I couldn't put a name to. Not anger, though. Anger was present. Something older than anger, and quieter. "You have absolutely no idea what you just did." Then the footage moved forward, and I leaned in. Fletcher had shifted his position near the wall. His eyes had dropped to Nora's handbag on the side chair. The corner of her phone was visible, the screen faintly lit. His head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowed. His hand came away from the wall. He began moving toward the chair. We were sitting on the front porch at Augusta Road on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after everything. October had gone cold enough that Nora had carried 2 mugs of coffee outside, and we were both wrapped in the same quilted throw she used to drag around the house when she was 12 years old, a habit she had never quite shed. 2 weeks after everything was an imprecise way of describing something very precise. The charges had been filed. Attorneys had been retained. The particular silence that comes with waiting had settled in. She set her mug on the railing and said, "Dad, I need to tell you what I did in that room, the part the footage couldn't show you." I told her to go ahead. What I'm about to relay is in her words, or as near to her words as I've been able to hold on to, because I have gone back over that conversation many times in the months since, and I am not willing to get any of it wrong. The accuracy matters. What Nora did in that room belonged to her, and I needed to carry the truth of it, not a version of it. Nora told me that when Fletcher moved toward her bag, she knew exactly what he intended before he took a single step. He'd been watching my phone for the last 10 minutes, she said, drawing the quilted throw higher around her shoulders. Every time the bag shifted and the screen caught the light, his eyes went to it. I could feel him working through the decision, and when he finally moved, when he reached in and took it out and killed the screen, he put it in his jacket pocket, not on the table. He wanted to be the one holding it. He needed to control whatever came through on it. He didn't power it down completely because keeping it live was the only way to stay ahead of whatever information it might carry. That was Fletcher. He always had to hold the information himself, which meant he had to keep it running. She stopped, smiled briefly at something private. I had to work very hard not to let anything show on my face, she said, because that was exactly what you needed him to do. That was exactly what I needed him to do, I said. We hadn't said it directly. We had spoken around it around the phone, around what would happen if he took it. She had understood. Here is the part I should explain, because I mentioned it earlier and said I'd return to it when it became relevant. 8 months before that night, I sat down with the technician I had worked alongside during the final years of my time on the force, a man who had spent his career designing tools for situations where standard equipment fell short. I described what I was worried about. What I'm about to share changed the entire shape of that night and what it meant for everyone in that room who thought they were in control. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you suspected someone close to you was moving against you quietly, would you confront them directly, or would you wait and let them show you exactly who they were? He walked me through what the technology could do. What emerged from that conversation was a piece of software living quietly on Nora's phone, dormant in the background, waiting on one specific condition, the screen going dark under an outside hand, while the device sat in a particular standby state. The moment that condition was met, the software opened a live audio stream, sending everything in real time to an encrypted cloud account that Nora and I alone could reach. Nobody else. That was the line I had drawn and would not move from. Once Nora was out safely, she would hand Aldous her credentials herself. Her choice, her authority, as the account holder, fully voluntary. What the engineers called it is beside the point. What it did is the point. The instant Fletcher's fingers killed Nora's screen and the phone disappeared into his jacket, the microphone went live. I didn't move a muscle, Nora told me. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Cordelia was watching me the way you watch something that's already over, like she'd run the table and knew it. I didn't give her a reason to think otherwise. I gave her exactly what she wanted to see. When I heard that, I grasped for the first time what remaining motionless in that chair had actually taken out of her. On the far side of the table, Cordelia's whole bearing shifted the moment the phone vanished. She put her glass down, swung toward Fletcher with the loose ease of someone who's finished the hard part. The careful, sociable front she'd held in place for the previous 40 minutes peeled back into something more unguarded and considerably colder. Every syllable exchange in that room from that point on was already streaming to a server neither of them knew existed. Cordelia had no idea. Fletcher had no idea. Nora was the only one in the room who did. Well, Cordelia said, that came together nicely. Fletcher looked toward Nora, more smoothly than I thought it would. Cordelia moved briskly into logistics, the documents going to their attorney, the filing wrapped up before the weekend, closed a handful of other financial instruments the signed pages had now opened the door to. She talked the way you talk when you're certain everyone in earshot is on your side. And then she went further. Nora told me she'd been steeling herself for some flavor of it, the quiet gloating, the payoff Cordelia had been building toward across the whole evening. What blindsided her was the particular form it took. Cordelia stated it plainly, without a trace of doubt in her voice. By morning, everything Devereaux built will belong to us. I had already seen that sentence in the transcript Aldous forwarded. Sitting on the porch with Nora 2 weeks later, hearing it come out of her mouth was something else entirely. Nora said she felt her jaw starting to lock and caught it, said her hands resting in her lap, curled into fists for a moment before she consciously flattened them. She sat inside Cordelia Calloway's fire-lit room, kept her breathing slow and steady, let them talk themselves empty, and return nothing. No expression, no movement, nothing they could use. That wound, she told me, that Saturday morning on the porch, both hands pulling tight around her mug, was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. What I'd asked of her was genuinely hard. She'd delivered it without once asking me to tell her how hard it was going to be. That deserved more than I could put into words. I looked at her for a moment and my throat did something unexpected. I took a long sip of coffee and let it pass. "You did everything right," I said. It came out rougher than I intended because the weight behind it was more than a single sentence could cleanly hold. "I trusted the plan," she said. "You told me to." We didn't say much after that. The October cold sat around us quiet and complete, and neither of us felt the need to disturb it. Somewhere in the 30-minute window from Greenville, my phone lit up on the console of Clifford's truck, Aldous. I answered before it rang twice. "Harlan." His voice had the control he always kept, but beneath it something else was present. The particular register of a man carrying good news he hasn't yet been able to put down. The stream is active, clean audio coming through in real time, court quality. I pressed the phone hard against my ear and shut my eyes for 1 second. "Got you," I said. "Then Haynes is at the gate," Aldous said. And at the Chanticleer estate in the Greenville, Dark Deputy Broderick Haynes raised a fist, moved his unit forward, crossed to the keypad, and typed 6 digits supplied by a man named Stellan Calloway, a man who had come very close to never picking up the phone at all. The iron gate opened without a sound. Inside Clifford's truck on that mountain grade, all I had was the quiet coming off the phone feed. Haynes and his people moving through the dark toward a house where Nora sat in a firelit chair, perfectly still, giving no one anything. 47 minutes. I know the exact count because I ran it myself. Phone against my ear, riding the passenger seat of Clifford's truck, watching the highway unspool the ridgelines of western Georgia, pulling past in the blackness. Underneath all of it, a clock ticking in my skull. I made no effort to silence it. Counting was mine to do. Everything unfolding beyond the windshield was not. 1, 2, 3. Aldous had bridged me into a secondary feed running alongside Haynes's operational channel. I had no way to transmit one direction only, but I could hear every detail. Boots on gravel clipped words between officers, the dense specific quiet of people who know what they are doing, moving in close formation on a target. Haynes had it running well. Aldous had told me as much before we left, and Aldous' read on, people had not missed in 3 decades. 22, 23. Clifford cut his eyes toward me from behind the wheel, then back to the road, and left it there. Beaumont had gone stone still in the rear seat, the same stillness he used to drop into. In the minutes before things broke back, when all 4 of us were young enough to be the ones moving toward the action, instead of listening to it from a truck. Clifford and Beaumont both understood what that stillness meant. None of us touched it with words. 38-39. Gravel gave way, stone underfoot, a pause. 40. Then the knock, 3 hard raps against a heavy door. That sound came through the feed and landed somewhere below my sternum. The door opened. "Good evening." Cordelia Calloway's voice arrived through the line with a sharpness that lifted the hair at the back of my neck. I hadn't expected my body to do that. After 33 years, I'd assumed I was finished being surprised by my own reactions. I had encountered that voice once before, through a 3-inch screen in a restaurant parking lot in Tennessee, on footage pulled from the camera I'd bolted above my own front door. I had heard it deliver its message deliberately, staring straight into the lens, see if the old man can reach you from 3 hours away. Now I heard it again, already smoothed and repositioned, surprise compressed into composure in roughly half a second. "Officer," Cordelia said, "what a curious hour. I suspect there's been some kind of mistake. 30 years sitting across from people in difficult rooms teaches you things no training manual covers. One of them is the sound of a voice running management rather than genuine reaction. It moves at the wrong speed, too rehearsed for spontaneity, too flat for real bewilderment. Cordelia Calloway had an exceptionally polished version of that voice, the best I'd come across in a very long time, and it was still a managed voice. The markers were fine, the pace the place where authentic shock should have lived and didn't. 30 years makes all of those visible. Haynes came back through the line without a beat of hesitation. "Mrs. Calloway, Deputy Broderick Haynes, Greenville County Sheriff's Office, acting under authorization from the State Bureau of Investigation. We are in possession of a valid search warrant for this property issued tonight by a Greenville County duty judge." A pause. "I'll need you to step away from the door." I had gone through that warrant myself the night before. Alton had walked through every line of it with me twice. A silence of roughly 2 seconds followed. "Of course," Cordelia said. And those two words, that particular flat clipped, of course told me precisely where her evening had just stopped going the way she'd drawn it up. I pressed the phone harder to my ear. Up front, Clifford kept his gaze locked on the highway and said nothing. Inside the house, Fletcher had heard the exchange from the window he'd slipped to, the moment he caught flashlight beams cutting across the front garden. Haynes described this to me 2 days later, when we sat together in a conference room at Aldis's office, and he walked me through the entry sequence from start to finish. Fletcher was flattened against the wall beside the window, angling his view toward the front step while keeping himself out of sight. He took account of the uniforms. He clocked the vehicle lights along the perimeter. Then Haynes told me. Something else told me that Nora had given him this detail herself during her statement. Fletcher turned away from the window and looked across the room at her. That was the piece of Haynes's account that lodged deepest. Nora had been doing something in that chair. She'd been counting too. She was right where Cordelia had seated her at the start of the evening and had barely shifted in the 41 minutes since Fletcher had pocketed her phone. Hands resting in her lap, spine straight, and she was looking directly at her husband across that beautiful, expensive firelit room. And she was smiling. Not broadly, not in any theatrical way, just a small, genuine, entirely unguarded lift at the corner of her mouth. The kind that surfaces when someone has been holding themselves under rigid control for a long stretch and has finally been handed their release. In 33 years of this work, I had built up a collection of images I couldn't put down. Haynes told me Fletcher's face when he saw that smile was something he wouldn't be forgetting quickly. Through the phone feed, I heard the front door swing wider. Haynes's footsteps crossed into the entry hall. A second set followed. A third. "Is there anyone else currently in the residence, Mrs. Calloway?" Haynes asked. "Just family." Cordelia's voice came back measured and clear. "My son is in the next room, and my daughter-in-law has been with us this evening. We'll need to speak with everyone separately," Haynes said. "That includes your daughter-in-law. Is she available?" A beat. A very brief one, just long enough for someone to recognize that no alternative available to her improved the situation. "Of course," Cordelia said again, and then she opened her mouth and began delivering the account she had rehearsed. The first sentence of it came through the feed, gracious, composed, precisely assembled, the voice of a woman presenting an explanation she prepared for a scenario she anticipated might demand one. I had sat across from more than 1,000 people over 33 years. I knew exactly what a rehearsed story sounded like in its opening sentence. I knew where the construction showed and why. Every one of them had that same quality, and I had watched each of them build it. Her prepared version did not survive 5 minutes. I heard it from the top through the phone feed. By the third sentence, I could see the shape of its collapse. 33 years of listening to invented accounts builds that specific instinct, the ear for a story that runs too smooth in the places where real memory produces friction, too conveniently detailed in certain areas and evasively thin in others. Cordelia's version was competent. I'll grant her that much. She had put genuine work into it. She told Haynes that Nora had been struggling emotionally for months, that the family had watched with growing alarm and felt they had no alternative but to step in. That the documents spread across the table were the product of a mutual loving agreement, a path forward for a young woman moving through an extraordinarily painful period. That everything that had happened that evening was the action of a devoted family, not the engineering of one. She delivered it with precisely calibrated sorrow in her voice. Grief at being placed in this position. Grief over Nora's suffering. The particular performance of a woman who needs you to understand that she is above everything else, a worried mother doing something painful because she has no other choice. Through the feed, I heard Haynes respond to each piece with quiet, unhurried acknowledgement, a measured yes. Here a considered pause before the next question that functioned as an audible nod. He let her build the whole structure without a single interruption, without the slightest indication that any part of it struck him as doubtful. He was letting her talk. I thought it through again. Smart. The laptop click was soft in the audio, but I caught it. The placement of the device on the mahogany table, and then the sound I had last heard, standing in a restaurant parking lot in Tennessee, and before that on my own porch in the rain, came through a speaker in Cordelia Calloway's living room. The audio quality was clean. Her voice was unmistakable. "Call for your father. See if the old man can reach you from 3 hours away." Through the phone feed, I felt the room change. Not a sound, a quality. The particular quality of air when a performance has been punctured by a fact. When Cordelia's voice returned, something essential had gone out of it. The warmth had drained away in the half-second between hearing herself on that recording and grasping what it meant that Haynes had it. She was searching for her next foothold. I could hear her doing it. She didn't find one in time. The doorway to the living room filled with a figure who had been standing in the hallway, standing there with 4 years of mornings and evenings in that house behind her. 4 years of carrying trays and holding her tongue and being rendered invisible the way that certain people are made invisible by certain houses. Celestina Fuentes walked into the room. Her back was completely straight. Her hands were folded in front of her, perfectly still. She had been terrified out there in that hallway, I know that, because she told me so. Herself sitting at my kitchen table 3 days later, her voice going quiet when she got to that part. But standing in that doorway facing Cordelia Calloway across the room, she had spent 4 years working and none of that fear was showing. What showed instead was something quieter and more enduring than fear. I have worked in this house for 4 years, Celestina said, her voice carrying across the room without any effort. I was present this entire evening. I heard what was said in this room, everything that was said. She held Cordelia's gaze without a flicker. I am prepared to say so formally to anyone who asks in any setting that requires it. Cordelia's lips parted. And Celestina, who had been shaking so badly in that dark hallway that she'd fumbled her phone trying to reach for it, held that look without a single degree of give. Haynes moved 1 step forward. Mrs. Calloway, I need you to remain in this room. His voice carried the specific practiced authority of someone who has issued that instruction many times and understands exactly what tone makes compliance the easier path. 2 members of his unit shifted their positions in the room to make the geometry of things plain. Through the audio feed, I caught Clifford's voice briefly in the background. He and Beaumont had coordinated with Haynes's team through Aldis's authorization, reaching the property ahead of me and taking up positions as the net drew tight. Clifford was supporting at the front. Beaumont had gone around. Then I heard a different set of footsteps, faster, carrying none of the measured deliberateness of someone working with a situation. Moving toward the rear of the house, toward, I would find out later, a kitchen exit that opened onto the back garden, and from there to a gap in the boundary hedging that Fletcher had clearly identified at some earlier point and quietly filed away. My hand locked around the phone. A door handle turned, the soft gyve of a latch lifting. Then a voice from the other side of it, unhurried, entirely settled, the voice of a man who had been standing precisely where he was, long enough to be completely at ease in the position. Going somewhere, Mr. Calloway? Beaumont Halsey. I pressed the back of my head into the headrest and drew a long breath in through my nose and let it go slowly. On the other side of that door, a pause long enough for a man to run every option available to him and arrive at the same answer each time. No. Fletcher's voice came back stripped of everything it had been built on for the past hour. No, I'm not going anywhere. Midnight. Those 40 minutes from the moment Fletcher's voice drained flat behind that back door to the moment my headlights swept through the Chanticleer gate were the hardest stretch of the whole night to sit inside. An SBI vehicle had intercepted us on I-26 Aldis's arrangement, and I'd climbed out of Clifford's truck and into the back of a state car with 30 minutes still on the clock. The young officer behind the wheel sized up the situation and drove without attempting conversation. Outside the window, Greenville rolled past in the dark. Streets I'd moved through in another chapter of my life, another decade entirely. I kept quiet. Back when this whole thing was nothing but a suspicion in a parking lot in Knoxville, I had gotten Alton on the phone and said, "Bring everything." 22 years of partnership means a phrase like that requires no further unpacking. Alton arrived at the Calloway estate at midnight case, over one shoulder-signed warrant in his jacket. He went directly to the study, no one had to point him, set the case on the desk, and started. Aldis was already there. Alton went straight to the signed documents, the full stack Nora had worked through page by page in that fire-lit room, the same stack Cordelia had been convinced held her clean victory. He read with the thorough, unhurried attention of a man shaped by 40 years of knowing that whatever a contract hides is always the piece that ends up mattering. He hit the inserted page at around the 12-minute mark. First pass, then a second slower. He pulled it away from the others and laid it flat on the desk surface, pressing it smooth with his palm. Then he looked up at Aldis. "She handed us everything," he said. Aldis studied the page without picking it up. "Break it down." It's a profit-sharing agreement. Alton's voice had the same unhurried precision it always took on when the destination was a courtroom. Not connected to the divorce proceeding, no relation to the marital estate. What it actually does is divert a defined percentage of asset proceeds from sources this document deliberately leaves unnamed into a private holding structure owned solely by Cordelia Calloway. A pause. None of the money moving through that structure appears in any public filing I can find attached to this family. We're not talking about small figures. Under Georgia law, running undisclosed financial proceeds through a private channel of this kind satisfies the statutory definition of money laundering under NCGS 14-118.4. 3 full seconds of silence from Aldous. She slipped it in herself, he said, without Fletcher knowing. Fletcher had no idea, Alton confirmed. Her calculation was that these papers would vanish into the legal machinery as a routine, uncontested divorce filing. She used Nora's signature to give cover to her own private financial scheme. He pulled his reading glasses off and set them beside the stack. She was too certain of herself to see what she was actually building. Haynes spoke from the doorway. He'd been standing there for several minutes without anyone registering him until his voice entered the room. Mr. Pritchard, the voice-triggered recording ran clean the entire time. 43 minutes of audio arrived on the server, including everything after Fletcher pocketed the phone. He extended a tablet toward Alton. Our analyst pulled a specific flag at the 31-minute mark. Alton read the notation aloud. By morning, everything Devereaux built will belong to us. That's verbatim from the audio, Haynes said. And roughly 6 minutes past that point, Cordelia stated clearly on the same recording that steps needed to be taken to make sure no one was in a position to offer a contradicting account of what occurred that evening. The study absorbed that. Not silence, something denser, more specific. The quality a room develops when everyone in it is landing on the same understanding at once. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. Alton said, his voice carrying the deliberate weight of a man who chooses his words, so there is no room later to claim they were imprecise. Felony charge, NCGS 14-226, combined with the general conspiracy statute, NCGS 14-2.4. And that sits on top of the coercion, the financial fraud, and the laundering count. He began dividing the documents across the desk into separate arrangements, each grouping its own legal track. Aldous, the moment the Greenville County Courthouse opens its doors, we file. Full case file assembled tonight. Aldous checked his watch. 7.5 hours. I need 4, Alton said. The rest is buffer. I got out of the SBI vehicle at the gate and followed the stone path up toward the house on foot. The study window glowed warm and steady against the dark face of the building. Through the glass, Alton hunched over the desk glasses back on his nose. Aldous to his left, arms crossed, watching. Stacks of paper laid out with the organized precision that belongs to people who know what structure they are raising and exactly how it needs to hold. I stood at that window for perhaps 30 seconds. 3 decades in law enforcement teaches you to recognize what a closed case looks like, not a completed one. A closed one, where everything has settled into position and the only remaining direction is forward. I had stood at the edge of a finished investigation before and known it by feel, that particular gravity that collects when evidence has run out of places to go. The study behind that glass had it. Alton and Aldous were exactly the right people for that room at that hour. I was not. I was the father. Those were not the same thing. I pulled myself away from the window and went toward the front door, toward the far side of the house where a light still burned. 33 years of this work had put me through a great many thresholds. Interview rooms, hospital corridors, the front steps of homes where the worst had already happened before I got there. Over time, I had built a way of crossing those lines, holding the weight of what waited on the other side at a remove until the professional part was done. This threshold didn't cooperate with that. My daughter was behind it. The entry hall was peopled but hushed. 2 of Haynes's unit members occupied the corridor near the study, heads down over their notebooks. Clifford stood at the far end of the hall, back flat to the wall, arms folded across his chest, watching the space with the stripped-down economy of someone who has completed his job and is now simply making sure the seams hold. When I came through the door, his eyes found mine. One slow nod. A tilt of his head in the direction of the living room. I went. Nora was on the sofa by the fireplace. The fire had gone down to its last orange coals, and the room drew most of its light from a floor lamp in the corner, amber quiet, nothing like the bright, purposeful arrangement Cordelia had set up in here for a different evening's work. Nora had her feet tucked up beneath her, a mug of tea in both hands. Her gaze settled on the garden window, where the rain had at some point stopped. The tiredness on her face ran deeper than one night's worth. But she was sitting up straight. She was present. Haynes occupied the armchair across from her elbows, resting on his knees, talking in a low voice. He had the measured, careful gentleness that comes from training yourself to bring hard news to people who have already absorbed hard things. And he was doing it exactly right. The next few days will require a formal statement, he was saying. We'll set that up at a time that suits you somewhere comfortable. Nothing has to happen tonight that you aren't ready for. Nora gave a small nod. Thank you, she said, and then a beat lower, for being here. Haynes sat up slightly. Ma'am, this is precisely where we're meant to be. Stellan came through the front door 10 minutes behind me. I heard the uneven rhythm of his steps in the entry hall before he reached the doorway. The hesitation of a man unsure whether he's entitled to the space he's about to enter. Tall, carrying his brother's features without his brother's assumed authority over any room he walked into. He found Nora across the room, and his face did something unrehearsed and real that no planned expression could have managed. His jaw tightened and released. Both hands opened and closed at his sides. I should have called sooner, he said, his voice not quite steady. I knew the shape of what they were doing, and I constructed reasons for myself to stay out of it. Every one of those reasons was wrong. I'm sorry, Nora. Genuinely sorry. Nora held his gaze for a long moment. Then she drew a slow breath that rose and fell through her entire frame. When it counted, you picked up the phone, Stellan, she said. That means something. The rims of his eyes went red. He clamped his lips shut and gave one tight nod, not confident enough in his voice to risk anything more. Celestina slipped out of the hallway, just then the tea tray in her arms, heading back toward the kitchen. She stopped at the edge of the sofa and rested her free hand barely more than a touch on Nora's shoulder, then met her eyes directly. What you showed tonight took real strength, Celestina said. Quiet, plain, no flourish to it at all. I need you to know I was watching. Nora lifted her hand and briefly laid it over Celestina's before the contact ended. She had no words for it either. Still, she made the attempt. Thank you, she said, for not leaving. One nod from Celestina and she moved on. Nora turned her face back toward the window. Outside, the garden was soaked blades of grass, catching the light spilling from inside, and the sky past the roofline had that scrubbed, opened-up quality that only arrives after heavy rain has finally run its course. She gazed at it for a beat, and then her expression shifted in a small, almost private way. It stopped. She murmured barely above a whisper. The words meant more for herself than anyone else. I never even noticed when it stopped. I was still standing in the doorway. She heard me. She turned. And the instant her eyes locked onto mine across that room, the room Cordelia had staged with such deliberate intent, the room that had since become something none of us had planned, for her face did something the footage had never caught, and that no description of mine could faithfully recreate. Something in it gave way. The composed, disciplined front that had held her together through 3 hours and 41 minutes released all at once, and what it left behind was simply my daughter. 39 years old, seated in someone else's house at midnight, her eyes on her father. Dad, the word didn't just crack. It broke clean through both syllables, lost. I moved across the room. I lowered myself onto the sofa beside her, placed my hand on top of hers, and felt her head settle against my shoulder. She drew in one long, shaking breath and pushed it all the way out, and I shut my eyes and curved my other hand against her head and held on. From somewhere at my back, Audrey Witten, who had made the drive up from Knoxville by herself, who understood precisely when to hold back, and when that was no longer something she could do, let out a sound she would never have permitted herself in any public setting, not if she'd had a moment's warning, a small involuntary catch. She pivoted at once toward the window, pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and stood there facing away from the room until she had herself back. 3 hours and 41 minutes. That was the distance measured in time between the moment Cordelia Calloway stared into my camera on a wet October night and told my daughter to call for her father, and the moment I settled beside Nora on that sofa while she buried her face in my shoulder and finally wept. 3 hours and 41 minutes. 3 hours earlier, Cordelia Calloway had looked straight into my lens and issued that instruction. She delivered it the way certain people deliver certain things, as though the argument against it simply doesn't exist, like a dare. As if the miles were the whole answer. As if 3 hours on the road was sufficient response to anything Nora might want to ask. It was a miscalculation and not a trivial one. Cordelia had treated distance and impossibility as synonyms. I settled on that sofa beside my daughter and let 33 years of professional composure do what it has always done once the work finishes. I let it come undone gradually the way packed snow yields when the temperature finally tips. No single dramatic moment, no visible collapse. Just the slow release of the thing I had kept coiled from the instant that footage first loaded on my phone screen in the parking lot of the Riverside Grill. Nora had cried herself out by then. She was still resting against my shoulder, her breathing settled, and even both hands cradling the teacup Audrey had put into them before retreating to the kitchen. The fire had burned low. The room assembled by Cordelia Calloway to radiate authority and permanence now read for exactly what it was. A costly hollow set that had played out its last scene for the night. My eyes moved across the fireplace, the mantel, the canvas hanging above it, oversized contemporary. The kind of thing that probably ran to several months of an ordinary wage and said nothing definitive about whoever had bought it. I looked at the chandelier overhead, unlit now, and the heavy curtains pulled across the dark windows. It was a beautiful room, I said softly, not addressing Nora in particular, speaking maybe to the space itself, raised on the wrong ground. Nora tilted her head up slightly. She took in the room alongside me for a moment. Then her gaze came back to her father. "You came," she said. Her voice was stripped to the core, nothing in it but the plain weight of what those two words carried. I held her gaze. "I never stopped," I said. She didn't look away for a long time. Her eyes were still raw around the edges, and the dried paths of earlier tears were still on her cheeks. She hadn't thought to clear them. She was 39 years old, and in that moment, she was the image of the 7-year-old who had once reached for my hand in the middle of a thunderstorm that had grown too loud. Not out of any need for protection. Only because she wanted me beside her. I had never forgotten what it felt like to be that for her. What I hadn't grasped until tonight was how much of my energy had been consumed by the fear of one day being shut out of it. I lifted my hand and held it against the side of her face. She closed her eyes and leaned into the contact the way someone leans toward a source of heat. Out of the kitchen, I could hear Audrey the methodical sounds of a person finding occupation in small domestic acts. Because small domestic acts are the only tolerable stand-in for feelings that are too unwieldy to say aloud. A cup placed carefully on a counter, water turned on and off, the specific cadence of someone who has had to give her hands a job because everything inside her is too restless to stay quiet. Audrey Whitten had come the full 2 hours from Knoxville on her own. No announcement, no request for clearance. When I happened to glance up sometime near midnight and found her already standing in the doorway, coat still buttoned, keys still in her fist, I didn't need any further explanation. Some people are built to show up. Audrey has always been built that way. She stepped into the living room doorway a short while later, 2 fresh cups of tea in hand, and set one on the table at my elbow, without so much as glancing at me. Her eyes went to Nora instead, and whatever she read there made her pull her shoulders back and lock her jaw. The expression she wears when she is refusing on principle to fall apart in front of someone who is counting on her solidity. "That one's for you," she said to Nora. "Actually drink it this time." Nora wrapped both hands around it. "Yes, ma'am." Audrey turned away fast, but not quite fast enough. I caught the glint in her eyes that she would have contested vigorously if anyone had dared bring it up. I remained in that room with my daughter for some time after. Life continued elsewhere in the house. Footfalls along other corridors, Deputy Haynes's voice carrying from the hall, the low murmur of Aldous talking on a phone in some other room, the measured and deliberate sounds of a team doing what skilled teams do when a case needs building. In the living room, though, in the quiet that had gathered itself around that sofa, like a closed hand, there were only the two of us and the fire dying in the grate, and all the things neither of us needed to say because they had been proven thoroughly and without remainder by everything that had already happened. The knock came at 12:37. Mr. Devereaux. The voice was low, composed, and precise in the way that belongs to people trained to walk into rooms still raw with what others have endured. "I'm Dr. Sylvia Moreau. I've been coordinated through the SBI's Victim Services Program. A brief pause. "I'm here for your daughter, if she's open to it." I looked over at Nora. She sat up a little straighter and drew breath. "Yes," she said. "Come in." I opened the door for Dr. Moreau and moved aside to give her space. She was a steady, composed woman, somewhere in her mid-50s medical bag. In hand, her movements unhurried and deliberate, in the way of someone who has entered many rooms like this one, and learned that the most valuable thing she carries in is her own calm. I watched her settle into the chair across from Nora and reach into her bag. I watched Nora's posture ease out of its guardedness as the conversation between them found its footing. Before I could allow myself any rest, one thing still remained. The final entry in the record, the piece that would lock everything from that night into the only permanence that counts. Greenville After Rain has a quality all its own. I had noticed it before. Over the years, I had observed how the mountain air scrubs itself clean after a long night of it, the way morning light comes through differently sharper, more honest, as though the sky has arrived at some resolution while everyone slept and means to hold to it. Standing at the window of the third-floor hallway at Prisma Health Greenville Memorial at 7 in the morning, watching that light climb above the eastern ridgelines, I thought I had never been as conscious of it as I was in that moment. There are mornings when circumstance places you in precisely the right position to receive the light. This was one of them. I had occupied hospital hallways before. 33 years of this work deposits you in a considerable number of them. I had sat in them waiting for coroner's reports, waiting for colleagues to emerge from surgery, waiting while family members finished identifying people I had located. I knew the particular acoustic texture of those corridors, the smell, the flat, unrelenting quality of fluorescent light at 3 in the morning. I knew what it meant to sit in one when whatever was on the other side of those doors lay entirely beyond your reach, regardless of how cleanly the preceding work had gone. I understood that specific gravity very well. This hallway did not carry it. I had never once sat in one waiting for good news rather than bad. That was new territory. It was the finest new thing I had encountered in a long time. I held that awareness with some care, the way you hold something you aren't fully certain you've earned, but aren't willing to let go of either. Dr. Moreau had wrapped up her examination at 2 in the morning and documented everything with the methodical precision her field demands. The report addressed the bruising on Nora's left forearm, the product of Fletcher's grip in the rain outside my front door, already captured on the camera footage, now confirmed through physical examination, with photographs, measurements, and formal medical notation. The language was clinical and exact, the way legal documentation has to be in order to endure the scrutiny a courtroom will put it through. Across 33 years, I had read a great many forensic medical reports, and I knew precisely what this one was worth. Alton received it at 6:45 when Dr. Moreau emailed the finished document from her tablet in the family consultation room, where she had been writing for the previous hour. He read it at the small corner table in the hallway, reading glasses on, the coffee cooling untouched beside him. When he finished, he closed the laptop with a quiet, deliberate click. That's everything, he said, not the everything of a man relieved to reach the end, the everything of someone who has just confirmed that a structure holds exactly as well as he built it to. 22 years working together had given me a fluent reading of what that word meant in each of its registers when Alton used it. This version meant complete in the fullest sense. Nothing absent, nothing to append, nothing left to interrogate. Aldous arrived at 7 Surrey, coming directly from a quick stop at his own office to gather final documentation from the SBI's overnight operation. He had the look of a man who hadn't slept, which was accurate, and of a man who had decided some time ago that this fact was not going to meaningfully alter his course, which was also accurate. Cordelia Calloway and Fletcher Calloway were formally taken into custody at 2:14 this morning, he said, on initial charges of criminal coercion and financial fraud, with additional charges from Alton's filing pending for this morning. They're being held at the Greenville County Detention Center awaiting a bail hearing. He looked at Alton. What time are you filing? The moment the clerk's office unlocks. Alton said 8 a.m. Aldous checked his watch. 41 minutes. I know, Alton said. The hallway received that exchange without any ceremony, 2 men at the tail end of a long night, confirming that a sequence of events had arrived where it was always headed. I had been present at the close of many cases. This one was unlike all the others. I left them to it and made my way back along the hallway to the vending machine, the kind hospitals install when they want to provide coffee without making any commitment to its quality. I pulled 2 cups out of it regardless and carried them back to the row of chairs near the window where Nora was sitting, legs drawn up on the seat. A blanket from the nurse's station across her shoulders, watching the same ridgeline I had been watching minutes before. I handed her one of the cups and settled in beside her. She took a sip, then made a face. "That is genuinely terrible," she said. Yes, I agreed and drank mine. We sat for a while. The hallway moved around us. Early shift nurses coming on an orderly, pushing a cart. The ordinary continuous motion of a place that does not pause for individual situations, however large those situations feel from inside them. The morning light through the window was building strength. The ridgeline was shifting from gray to green. Nora turned the cup slowly in both hands. "It's over, isn't it?" she said. It landed more like a statement than a question, the way you speak something aloud that you've been testing, privately, checking whether it still holds, once it has to move through air. I recognized that particular note in a voice, the sound of someone asking the world to confirm something they need to be true, because hearing it spoken is different from carrying it alone. I looked at my daughter in the light of that hospital hallway, her hair still holding traces of the previous night's rain, her eyes clear and present and tired in the specific way of someone who has come through something they will carry for a long time, but who is undeniably on the far side of it. "The hard part is behind you," I said. "The rest is paperwork." She looked at me for a moment, and then something moved through her expression, something that had nothing to do with strategy or composure, or managing anything at all. One corner of her mouth lifted, then the other followed, and she laughed, quiet and worn and small. The laugh of someone who has held a serious face for so many consecutive hours that the muscles have nearly lost the memory of the alternative. It lasted about 4 seconds. It was the most genuine thing I had heard the entire night. That one. That is the one I am going to keep. Not the recording, not the warrant, not the footage, not the fraudulent document Alton had lifted from the stack with careful fingers. All of those things had served their purpose, but they were what I had assembled from a distance of 3 hours. What I had driven those 3 hours to reach was sitting next to me, drinking bad vending machine coffee in the early light. Alton appeared at the far end of the hallway, at 7:43 coat, on briefcase in hand, phone at his ear. He lowered it when he reached us. "Cordelia's attorney turned up at the detention center 20 minutes ago," he said, requesting access to their client. I looked up. "Let them," I said. Alton tilted his head slightly. "It begins." I turned back to my daughter. She was watching the ridgeline move from gray to gold in the growing light of a new Greenville morning, still holding the coffee cup in both hands. And something in her face had arrived at a quality I recognized, the particular steadiness of a person who has passed through something very large and discovered the ground is still firmly under her feet. I rose, set my empty cup on the windowsill, and looked out at the Greenville sky, fully blue, now the mountains sharp and clear, in the way they only are after a night of rain has scoured them clean. Somewhere on the other side of the city, on a quiet stretch of Augusta Road, the small black camera above my front door was blinking its green light at nothing in particular, watching an empty porch the way it always did, doing exactly what it had been made to do. "It began last night," I said. "This is just where it goes on the record." Alton nodded, once lifted his briefcase and headed back down the hallway. I watched him go, then turned back to the window, and the blue sky above Greenville's eastern ridgeline, clean and sharp and certain, the way that sky always presents itself after a long night of rain has finished its work. In the weeks that followed, people came at me with the same question dressed in different clothes. Former colleagues, neighbors, 2 journalists who tracked down my address and deposited notes in my mailbox that I left unanswered. They all eventually arrived at the same ground, approaching it from different directions. "How did you know? How were you that ready? How does a 70-year-old retired detective sitting at a table in Tennessee on a Friday evening have every element already in position before the situation has even declared itself?" I gave each of them the same answer. I was not prepared. I was paying attention. Those are not the same thing, and the distinction carries more weight than most people give it credit for. Preparation assumes a specific outcome you have decided in advance will happen, a blueprint drawn for an event you've already committed to expecting. What I actually did was something more ordinary and considerably less comfortable. I paid attention when something in my daughter's voice told me the temperature of her life had shifted. And then I sat with that knowledge until I understood what it asked of me. 3 weeks before the night of October 14th, Nora called me from Greenville. The call ran 22 minutes. She talked about the weather, a restaurant she had recently tried, a book she was nearly finished with, and whether I had replaced the porch light that had been flickering since the previous spring. She covered all of it with the careful ease of someone loading a conversation with just enough content that no single piece of it invites too much scrutiny. I had spent 33 years listening to people speak around the thing they most needed to say. I knew that quality of language the instant I heard it. The morning after that call, I sat down with Alton Pritchard in his office on Wardlaw Street and told him what I had caught beneath the surface of what she said and what I believed needed to happen. Irrevocable trusts in Georgia take time when they are executed with the care the work demands. The documentation must be drafted, witnessed, and notarized. A trustee must be formally named and must accept that appointment in writing. Every asset being moved into the trust must travel with a complete and accurate legal record at each stage. Alton told me the process would require between 2 and 3 weeks when handled with the rigor needed to hold up under any future examination. I told him I had exactly 3 weeks. We had 3 weeks. We used every one of them. What the trust achieved was simple in result, though the legal architecture beneath it was anything but. It moved the entirety of my personal assets into an irrevocable legal structure with Nora as the sole named beneficiary. The Augusta Road property, the investment accounts I had built across 33 years of deliberate saving, a collection of financial instruments Alton had helped me assemble over the previous decade, all of it transferred into the trust, each element of the move documented in full. Once those assets passed into the trust, I no longer held legal ownership of them in any sense. The trust held them. Nora was the beneficiary. That distinction has real consequences under Georgia's equitable distribution law, and it deserves to be stated plainly. In a divorce proceeding, only marital property is on the table. Assets received as a gift during a marriage are classified as separate property under Georgia law. They cannot be drawn into the marital estate and subjected to equitable distribution. The assets sitting in the trust were a gift from me to Nora as the named beneficiary. Whatever arguments Fletcher's attorneys chose to raise those assets were never part of any discussion about dividing the marital estate. They had never entered that conversation. Alton had made certain of it. Nothing to divide. He told me 2 weeks after that night, sitting across from me in his office with the document stacks arranged between us. The coerced documents will be declared void by the court. Contracts signed under duress are voidable under established Georgia precedent. And the evidence of that duress is both extensive and beyond any reasonable dispute. He closed the folder and looked up. She walks out of this completely protected. He set the folder on the desk. Fletcher's attorneys will try a fraudulent conveyance argument. The timing of the transfer will be their angle, but the assets transferred were your separate property, not marital assets, and the trust predates any formal legal proceeding by 3 weeks. No marital estate claim reaches it. On the criminal side, the weeks moved with the unhurried momentum of a case where the evidence has no place left to go but forward. Aldous reported that the fraudulent profit-sharing agreement Cordelia had slipped into the document stack had opened a financial investigation considerably broader than the events of October 14th. Questions about the origins of the funds being routed through Cordelia's private holding structure, about who else in the Callaway financial network had known of the arrangement and how long it had been running. The investigation was ongoing. Preliminary hearings were scheduled. Attorneys entered appearances on the record. The machinery of the criminal justice system, which moves at its own necessary pace regardless of urgency from any quarter, began its work. Nora moved into the Augusta Roadhouse in the last week of October. We spent a Saturday clearing out the spare room and getting the front bedroom organized where the morning light came through at the angle she preferred. She brought 4 bundles of books, a pair of lamps that were better than mine, and a fern she had been carrying from one apartment to the next for 6 years that looked against all odds remarkably healthy. We had a brief disagreement about the best position for the kitchen table, which was exactly the kind of disagreement I had been missing without recognizing it. Late that afternoon, I found her on the front porch. She was looking at the small black camera fixed above the door. Its green indicator light blinked with its usual patient regularity. The same light, the same camera, doing the same job it had always done, watching an empty porch on a quiet October afternoon, as though nothing had changed and nothing had mattered. "That little thing," Nora said. Her voice was quiet, carrying the weight of something she'd been holding for some time. "It saved my life." I stood beside her. "No," I said. She looked at me. "You read every page of those documents under that kind of pressure?" and noticed the paper that didn't belong, I said. You held yourself together in that room for 41 minutes, while everything we needed was being recorded. You made the decision to wear that coat. You trusted a plan that required you to sit completely still when every instinct in you was pushing toward action. I looked at the green light blinking above the door. That camera recorded what you did. There is a difference between those two things, and it is not a small one. She was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth shifted. Okay, she said. We both did pretty well. Yes, I said. We did. 2 months later, a thick envelope from the Greenville County Clerk of Court arrived in the afternoon mail. It sat on the kitchen table in the December light, with the particular unassuming weight of official correspondence that already knows precisely what it holds and is simply waiting for you to catch up. Nora found it when she came in from her morning run, cheeks flushed from the December cold breath coming in short white clouds. She picked it up and turned it over before she opened it, the way you handle something you have been expecting, long enough that its arrival registers more as confirmation than surprise. She opened it at the kitchen counter and read the first page. Then she looked up at me across the kitchen. Her expression carried something I recognized immediately, the same composed steadiness she had brought into that fire-lit living room in Chanticleer on the night this all began. Not certainty exactly, something more durable than certainty. The steadiness of a person who has already settled the question of who they mean to be, whatever comes next. A trial date had been set, January 2024, Greenville County Courthouse, 9 in the morning. It's real, she said, her voice holding something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, though it carried the weight of both. It was always real, I said. Now it has a date and a time. That is all a trial needs. She set the letter down on the table and stood looking at it for a long moment. Then she straightened, picked up her water bottle from the counter, and walked toward the hallway. Her footsteps faded up the stairs, and the house reclaimed its quiet January stillness. The Greenville County Clerk of Court envelope remained on the kitchen table, sitting in the flat winter light where she had left it. We were ready. That readiness had its roots in an October morning, when I laid everything out for Alton Pritchard, what I needed, and exactly why. 3 months from October 14th, January 2024, Greenville County Courthouse. The building occupies College Street in the heart of downtown Greenville, brick and stone, older than nearly everything flanking it. It is the kind of architecture that makes a statement without speaking. What happens inside these walls is not a casual matter. I had passed through those doors on many occasions over the decades, always arriving through the side entrance case file tucked under one arm, a clear sense of my position in whatever proceeding I was walking into. This time I came in as a member of the gallery with my daughter seated next to me. Nothing about it felt the same. It felt better, in ways I had not let myself anticipate. Judge Harriet Quinby took the bench at precisely 9, a woman in her mid-60s, silver-haired, carrying the kind of quiet authority that only accumulates in someone who has been deciding serious matters long enough to have no patience left for performance. The bailiff called order. The room rose. 30 years of courtroom testimony, always wearing the same hat. The investigator, the case builder, the one who assembled the evidence and handed the story off to a prosecutor, and then watched from the stand as it took hold in the room. I had fielded questions from attorneys on every conceivable side of every conceivable thing more times than I bothered to track. But when the state prosecutor called my name in that first hour, and I made my way to the stand, I was there in a different capacity entirely. Not as the architect of someone else's case, as the father of the woman who had been put through what she had been put through. It was the most honest version of a walk I had made many times before, and it felt for all that had led to it like precisely the right ground to be standing on. I told the court what the doorbell camera had recorded. I walked through the device, its installation, its capabilities, and what it had captured on the night of October 14th. The prosecutor guided me through it methodically, at the measured pace of someone who knows a jury has to live with information for a while before it becomes certainty. 3 decades of testimony have a way of becoming part of how you breathe. I answered everything in that register, and I watched the jury watching me. My testimony finished, and the evidence began making its way into the record item by item. When the doorbell footage played with the audio on the sound, filled the courtroom, Cordelia Calloway's voice clean through the rain, unmistakable. Call for your father. See if the old man can reach you from 3 hours away. 2 jurors in the front row turned and looked at each other when those words landed. No one spoke, The moment was enough. The voice-triggered recording came in next. The state's attorney queued up the relevant passage. Cordelia relaxed unguarded, working through what needed to go away and what needed to be confirmed. By morning, everything Devereaux built will belong to us. The prosecutor gave those words several seconds of silence in the room before moving on. The button camera footage laid out the signing sequence, Nora reading through every page with care, and the instant Fletcher picked up the phone. Dr. Moreau's forensic medical report came in as a physical exhibit. The bruising on Nora's arm, every measurement and photograph on the record described in the precise clinical language that strips the act of anything abstract and makes it simply a fact. Alton's paralegal submitted the fraudulent profit-sharing document as a standalone exhibit, together with a 2-page memo from the state's Financial Crimes Division that explained in plain terms what the document was and what it demonstrated. Celestina Fuentes took the stand on the second morning. She settled into the witness chair, hands resting flat on her knees, and she gave her account in the even unhurried voice of someone who made a decision some time ago about what needed to be said and arrived prepared to say all of it. Her testimony tracked the evidence with the clean precision of a person narrating only what they had directly observed. Cordelia's attorney took a run at her on cross. There was nothing there to work with. Stellan Calloway came last, before closing arguments. He came to the stand in a dark suit, sat down, and told the courtroom what he had overheard during an evening at his mother's house in early October. His voice didn't waver. When he spoke about his mother, he didn't look toward her side of the room. He looked at Fletcher once when he got to the part about Fletcher's role in what he'd heard, and Fletcher dropped his eyes to the table and kept them there. Watching Stellan testify, I had braced for something complicated. Resentment at the months of silence. Some knotted version of gratitude for the call he had eventually made. What I found instead, watching him hold himself straight in that chair and tell the truth in a public room, was something cleaner than either of those things. Something that didn't need to be worked through. Judge Quinby read the verdicts on the third afternoon. Cordelia Calloway, guilty of criminal coercion, conspiracy to obstruct justice, money laundering, sentencing to follow in 6 weeks. Fletcher Calloway, guilty of criminal coercion and aiding and abetting, a separate date for sentencing. The court officers began moving to escort Cordelia out. She turned before they reached the door. Not an accident. The deliberate choice of someone who intends to look at a specific face one final time before the opportunity closes for good. Her eyes found mine. Mine found hers. Over 30 years I had been in courtrooms when verdicts were announced, and I had looked at a great many faces in those moments. The expression was always a variation on the same underlying thing. Disbelief wearing whatever mask the person had on. The particular disbelief of someone who had at their core expected the facts to yield to their preferred version of them. Cordelia Calloway's face held that exact expression. The officer moved her through the door, shut behind her, and she was gone. Next to me, Nora laid her hand over mine on the gallery armrest. Warm, steady, the hand of a woman who had worked through every page of a coerced document stack and spotted the one sheet that had no business being there. I turned my palm up and held on. Through the tall windows of Greenville County Courthouse, the season's first real snow had started coming down, fine and quiet, settling over the downtown rooftops and the brick faces of College Street and the bare-limbed trees over a city that had carried on through all of this without knowing and would move past it before long. Some things don't require the world's awareness. They only require that they be true. There is a quality to October mornings in Greenville that doesn't reveal itself until you've put in a full year of paying attention. The light arrives low and golden through the oak canopy, the trees that run the length of Augusta Road in both directions, and they turn the neighborhood into something a painter would struggle to improve on. The air has a particular edge to it, mountain autumn, past the point of comfortable, but not yet arrived at cold, the kind that makes choosing to drink your coffee outside feel like something more than habit. I had taken up this porch for 11 consecutive Octobers. This one was unlike any of the others. A year back this same week, I was sitting in a restaurant in Tennessee with a glass of rye whiskey untouched in front of me for 20 minutes, watching the ice go soft in the amber, while my colleague's conversation moved around me, still ignorant of what was about to appear on my phone. A year ago. Some mornings that felt like the recent past. Other mornings, it felt like the ending of a story I had already closed and returned to the shelf. Today it felt like both at once. In the kitchen, Nora was at the table. I could make out the quiet texture of her working keyboard, a page turning now and then, the particular cadence of a person absorbed in something of their own choosing. She had returned to the field she was trained for, accepting a role with a Greenville firm she had been talking to since spring. She was good at the work. She had always been good at it. 2 years of disruption had pulled her away from that fact for a time. It was hers again now. Some things find their way back. The ones that matter tend to, if you leave them enough room. I thought about the people who had been in those rooms with me that night. Aldous Crenshaw was still director of the SBI, still hauling the weight of several counties behind his eyes, still carrying it without letting it show. He had grown considerably more receptive to fishing trips since October of last year, something I attributed to the particular leverage that shared experience tends to produce, and which I had every intention of continuing to apply. He was coming to Greenville the following spring. I had already chosen the lake. Clifford Rafferty was still working out of Columbia, still bringing that watchful stillness into every room he walked into, still the sharpest mind in most of them. He sent me a bottle of single malt scotch the week after the verdict, a very good one, with a note that said, "Only drink this one." I did. It was better than what we'd had in Knoxville. Beaumont Halsey had been living on his boat in Georgia since June. He sent photographs, sometimes early morning shots of still water fish he'd caught and let go, and once a great blue heron that he said had been aggressively following his vessel for 3 days, and which he had named Aldous. I had not told Aldous. Audrey Witten had gone back to her church hall, her mathematics lessons, and her pecan pie. We had our reservation in at the Riverside Grill for next Friday the 11th. Annual, the same long table by the window, the same river sliding past outside. This year the table was booked for 6 instead of 5. Nora had said yes before I got to the end of asking. Stellan Calloway had left Greenville in February. He was in Charleston now. As far as I knew, something in commercial real estate work he had done for years before everything unraveled. He called every few weeks always with the same question. How is Nora doing? We always gave him the same answer. She is doing well, better than well. He always received it like a man being extended a courtesy he hadn't been sure he was still owed. Celestina Fuentes was employed by a family 3 streets over from the Augusta Roadhouse. I had not arranged it in any obvious way, and she had not asked me to. But a conversation with a neighbor back in November had moved through the natural current of information in a quiet neighborhood toward an inquiry, and Celestina had taken the position in December. She was happy there. That was the word the neighbor offered when I asked once casually how things were going. Happy. It was enough. As for the Calloway estate in Chanticleer, Cordelia's attorneys had attempted several procedural maneuvers ahead of sentencing that accomplished nothing beyond demonstrating that an impressive brief is not the same as a persuasive one when the evidence is what it was. She was serving an active sentence. Fletcher's was shorter. The divorce had been finalized in March. The coerced documents voided by the court, the marital assets distributed under equitable distribution law. With the irrevocable trust intact and Nora's separate property correctly classified, Fletcher departed with precisely what he had brought into the marriage. The front door swung open. Nora came out carrying 2 cups of coffee, not the vending machine variety which we had both agreed. In the hospital hallway deserved a harsher verdict, but actual coffee brewed in the kitchen from proper beans. She ordered from a small roaster in Traveler's Rest. She passed 1 cup to me, settled into the chair at my side, pulled her knees up and turned her face toward the October light filtering through the oaks. "You're doing the thing again," she said. "What thing?" "The porch thing. The thinking thing. I was looking at the trees." "You were thinking?" she said. "You have a different look when you're thinking than when you're just looking at something." I drank my coffee. "I've been told that before." "I'm sure you have." She tucked her feet further under her and cupped both hands around her mug. "What were you thinking about?" I looked out at the street, the gold light, the oaks. The small black camera above the front door, its green light blinking with the same patient steadiness it had always kept. "Last October," I said. She went quiet for a moment. Not the empty quiet of someone with nothing on their mind, but the deliberate quiet of someone deciding how to put something into words. "Me too," she said. "Sometimes," I nodded. "And then I come out here," she said, "and there's coffee and the trees look like that, and it gets easier to be in this October instead." I looked at my daughter in the morning light, 39 years old, both hands are around a coffee cup, watching the oak trees do exactly what oak trees do in October in the mountains of western Georgia. She was right about the trees. She was right about a great many things. Cordelia Calloway had looked into my camera on a rainy October night a year ago and told my daughter to call for her father to see if the old man could reach her from 3 hours away. She said it as though the distance settled the matter, as though geography was the final word. She was wrong about that. I reached her. 3 hours of highway and mountain road, and the specific urgency of a person who has decided that distance is not a variable worth calculating. I reached her, and every morning after that, every morning she steps through the front door with 2 cups of coffee and drops into the chair beside me. In the October light, I am still reaching her. That is what reaching someone looks like. Not a single night, not one drive, not one warrant and 1 unit and 1 iron gate swinging open in the Greenville dark. All of that mattered. All of it was necessary. But what it was in service of what all of it pointed toward was this. This porch, this light, this ordinary and extraordinary morning. The camera blinked its green light at nothing in particular. The river 500 meters southwest was still moving, the way it always had, wide and dark, entirely indifferent to anything that had taken place on its banks. The same river it had been, the night I sat beside it in a restaurant, felt my phone begin to vibrate, and made the only decision available to me, to answer. I kept answering. I am still answering. I have been asked what I take away from all of this. No document, no signature, no clause carries more weight than the person in front of you asking you to trust them. I understand that now, in a way I did not before any of this began. I wish I had understood it sooner. I am not a particularly religious man, but I believe something finds its way into the details. Into a 3-hour drive, a camera's green light, a daughter who held herself completely still and gave them nothing. This is a family story. Like most family stories worth telling, it is also about what happens when money enters a room and trust quietly steps out. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself. It arrives dressed in legal language and offered with a careful smile. And the most difficult thing about it is that you rarely see it coming from the people who are supposed to be standing closest to you. If you recognize the signs, don't wait. Don't let the papers get signed first. Don't confuse silence for loyalty. Don't let a story like this one become yours before you've built the means to fight back. I got fortunate. Not everyone does. That October morning on the porch, coffee in hand, Nora beside me, the oak trees doing what they always do. That was what all of it was for. Not the verdict, not the filing. That morning, I have been asked what this cost me. The honest answer is that the hardest thing I carried through those months was not the distance or the drive or the hours in hallways. It was the years before when I had not understood how quietly a person can be surrounded until the walls are already closing. I believe God put that camera above my door before I understood why I needed it. The Lord's timing is not always legible until you're standing on the other side of it. These father stories, the ones where a dad's revenge is not anger, but preparation, not noise, but patience, they don't make the news. But they are real, and they happen one careful decision at a time. Here is what I would tell anyone who hears something they cannot yet name in the voice of someone they love. Trust that feeling. Act on it before the papers are in front of them. If someone is using legal language to take what belongs to the people you are responsible for, the answer is more documentation, not less. Build your record quietly and completely. Do not confuse a person's confidence with their correctness. The most dangerous assumptions are the ones made by people who have never been wrong in a room before. And if you are waiting for the right moment to protect someone, that moment has already passed. The next best one is right now. If this story stayed with you, leave a word below. Share it with someone who comes to mind when you hear the word trust. And if you are not yet subscribed to His Hidden Revenge, do that now. There is more to come, and it is worth being here for. Thank you for listening all the way through. Take care of the people in your circle. I will see you in the next one.